So I'd like to welcome everybody for coming today, and I'd also like to take a second to thank our speaker, Dr. Tina, for coming to be with us today. She is a very reputable person who has done some amazing work all over the place, both in Australia, where her roots are, and here at home, and for all of us in Sudbury. Or I'm sorry, in Canada, pardon me. And then we're also going to learn a lot from her. And in order to do that in a really positive way, I think it's really important that we understand we do have some people joining us who are not necessarily from the financial world, and welcome to those. And so in order to make this really helpful and productive, though, it's a really safe place. Anybody who has any questions and wants to move forward and learn as much as possible, please feel free to say whatever you think is important in order to get the most value out of our session today.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everybody. I'm Tina. I'm in Calgary, where we can boast a very balmy -9 after having come out of not a very balmy -28, -29 last week. And so it's been pretty cold for us, but that's expected. It is February. So you have my bio if you've been interested enough to read it. Not that I necessarily expect everybody to read it, but I'm not going to go on and on at all about who I am or what I've done. You can tell already that I have an Australian accent. So I started off in Australia. I came to Canada in the 70s and did all sorts of things. I went to Britain to do my PhD, and then long story short, went back. And the most relevant to this kind of work is that Marguerite Picard, Tricia Peters and myself, as you may or may not know, set up Melbourne Collaborative Alliance in about 2006-07 in Melbourne. And then we worked the model. So we created this interdisciplinary team model that we worked. We created training. We dodged and weaved and did all kinds of things to adjust what we were doing to try and tweak it. And then I worked cases with them. I'm still very involved as a founder at MELCA. But I came back to Calgary in 2015 and brought that experience back with me and started Peacemakers for Families. So where I've been since, and I see that there are some people that I recognize. I see Holly's face there. Hi, Holly. There are some other people whose names I recognize. Brad Hunter, for example. Hi, I see a thumbs up. So let me just start, I think, with the very first slide, please, Linda. Linda's going to do this for me because I don't absolutely rely on my my computer. And if my camera goes weird with multicolors, I'm going to turn my camera off and just use audio. But for now, it's fine. And of course, the slides will still come on. So this is the Peacemakers for Families case process map that has been developed over time. And it gives you an idea of the structure of what we do. And one of the things that we do at Peacemakers, I do at Peacemakers, and to some extent this comes from out of the MELCA experience, but not exactly the same, is what we do at the very front end of the intake. And so we start it we talk about it as an interdisciplinary collaborative case, obviously, and we assume that it's going to be interdisciplinary from the very beginning. But the lawyers are not necessarily involved at the front end. Now, the referral might be from a lawyer. One lawyer might have had an individual one-on-one or an inquiry, and then that lawyer may have sent the case or their one individual person to me or to the financial neutral in the case, for example. And because I'm neutral, because the financial professional is neutral, we can therefore meet with either online or in person, both members of the couple, both separately and together. And so that to me is absolutely central to how I work and the success of engaging any clients in a team process, because all around the world for the last 20, 25 years, people have said to me, to us, my colleagues at MELCA and so on, how do you engage the other person? How do you actually get these people in? And so one of the things that I think is really critical is that we get them in by the use of the neutrals. And so obviously, if in that intake session, I identify that there are some really essential issues that will require legal advice, like literally to do with protection of children being taken out of the country, allegations of significant abuse, really severe things, and it happens very rarely if people are coming to a mediated or a collaborative kind of model anyway, then I will bring the lawyers in very early on. And I have a group of lawyers who are trained in collaboration as well as in mediation. They're a member of the pod group called P3 that I set up some years ago in Calgary, and they would be ultimately receiving the referral anyway from me, and they would then come in early, but mostly they don't. Mostly we do the intake. So the intake is triage, providing information, assessing the client's needs, assessing suitability, commitment to separation, commitment to being cooperative. I see, if I just talk very generally about it being me doing this a lot, I'm not the only person doing this kind of intake, but that's for the most part, argue that I'll just use I. So I'll see them individually and together, 2 hours or so, and then we all discuss, the three of us then discuss together what we're going to do next. So in that 2 hours, by the end of that, I have a commitment to what they want to do next is the next step. And generally speaking, it is to go into the next step of collaboration, where I might then have another individual session with them. I might have a joint session with them. I will refer them to the financial neutral, who will then talk about what their role is, and give them the list of information that's required for the financial disclosure. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to pause all the way through this because I'm interested in people's responses or feedback, and if there isn't any, then I'll just proceed. But I don't want you to get completely bored with me just being a talking head. Okay, so that's step one. Does that seem clear, Linda? Does that seem clear in terms of what I've said?
It seems clear to me. I don't know if any of the of our participants have any questions about that, but it does seem very clear.
I just have a comment.
Carl. Hi, Carl.
How are you?
I'm great. And you?
I am well. And just your opening part of this presentation is what I need you to say to our collaborative group here in London, Ontario, because they're having such a hard time trying to figure it out. And just this first part, I was just like, I just need someone else to say this other than me, because I'm not a lawyer, and obviously for some strange reason lawyers don't like to listen to me. I don't know why. So
my first response to that, Carl, is why can't the words come out of your mouth? Just say it.
I have many times, and then they usually just ignore me. So and now I do have a few lawyers now that are willing to voice whatever I say, and it's starting to progress. But no, I think the only question so far I had was, can I have the slide?
Can you have the slide?
Yes.
Of course. Yep, no problem.
Sweet.
Realize that it's copyrighted to me, etc. Right? But yeah, this is my my process map. But no, given that it's in the public domain now, if you want to have a copy of the slide, I'm sure. Linda, are you comfortable with releasing the slides?
As long as it's your permission, yes.
So that's fine. And if you want me to come and do a live training, as I was saying to Linda earlier, then I'd be very happy to do that. Quid pro quo, of course, Carl.
Of course. And yes, I will definitely. Anyways, yes, we will talk afterwards.
Okay, so this whole intake thing, we've got quite a lot to talk about today, so I'm not going to go on and on, but this is a whole training, how to engage clients in team collaboration. And this is where it starts. And so there's a whole lot of things that happen before the first contact, where the first phone call comes from, where the first inquiry comes from, and to whom the inquiry goes. And so if the inquiry goes to either of the neutrals, right, the family professional or the financial professional, then you are fairly easily able to be in business. If the client first inquiry goes to a lawyer, then it may be completely unknown. It just sort of goes into the secret hole in the ground, perhaps, because you won't hear or anything about that referral. Or if you've got a really lovely, active, collaborative group, you might hear about that referral. And so I've got a few great lawyers in Calgary who will refer to us. And I say, look, you know, if you've got one client in your office and you have questions about team collaboration, what my job is, what the financial job is, why bother having all these people? Classic question. How much does it cost? Second classic question. Just phone me. Phone me when that client is actually in your office, and just pick up the phone. And if I can, I'll try and take that call. And if not, I'll phone that client back. And so all that educative stuff at the front end is really, really important to set the scene for the rest of this. And if it's done successfully, your case is really off and running. Okay. So the next step is the foundation work. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the clients just yet have met their collaborative lawyer. Now, if they come in with a lawyer, that's another whole story, which I can address. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they haven't gone to lawyers, they're deciding, well, there are various circumstances in which obviously they make contact. It could be one client who's just thinking about separating and asking questions about, oh, what does this mean? Is it going to affect the children? How much is it going to cost? Can I afford to separate? Sometimes those referrals come to me. Sometimes they go to the financial. Can I afford to separate? Can I afford to live on my own? How much is all this going to cost? And so those clients you want to be able to capture, because you're going to be educating them either on the phone or in person into what this model's about. So I then am doing the work. I'm a family professional. I don't call myself a divorce coach. That's not a term that I use at all. I try and encourage people in my profession, the mental health profession, not to use that terminology. My reasoning is that there is a connotation about coaching, which worldwide is very variable and often doesn't necessarily have positive connotation, and as a noun, coach, but as a verb, to coach. Everybody in the professional team are coaching within their own profession. I coach, the financial coaches and the lawyers coach. And I'm coaching everybody to coach in whatever their particular discipline is in order to get this case over the line, okay? So I deal with the couple as parents, and I deal with the parenting plan. I deal with communication. I deal with marriage closure issues. If I have received a referral of a single client who has not yet told the spouse that they are wanting to make this decision, I do all of that work up front with them. And so it's very early on. How they tell the children, when they tell the children, who's present at that meeting, I coach them all through that. What happens with the extended family, what's the public story about the separation, who needs to know, who doesn't need to know, etc. So all of that's within my role. And then the role of the financial then comes in now, basically in this chronology, because they are collecting the financial disclosure. And so all of this is happening without any input from lawyers at this stage. So this is, if you wish to take this particular line, can be controversial with the collaborative lawyers. There are many lawyers who handle that first session extremely well. They do, like what happens in Melbourne, they do an information session. The information session can actually happen and be done by any of the three disciplines. But they, in fact, might be a lawyer meeting both clients. They're neutral, they're giving information only, and then the clients decide whether that particular lawyer whom they just met represents one of them ultimately, or the other. But then after that information session, it comes back into doing the foundation work that I've just talked about. So it's just a really small difference in terms of who does that very first contact. And it is not taken, the control is not taken by the lawyers at all in the beginning. So I do the status of the children, the family readiness, the couple readiness. All the time I'm looking for, are they actually ready to negotiate? Are they ready to settle? Or what's happening? How hot is the communication still? How avoidant is the communication still, which is obviously a strategy to avoid the heat. So that's my realm of specialty. The realm of specialty for your discipline, the financial, is to not only just do the financial disclosure, but way more than that. So you're building a financial picture of what's going on in this family. You're looking at spending patterns. You're looking at attitudes to money. You're looking at whether money is being used as a platform for conflict. Is there equal information available? Who has run it all? Or has one person traditionally run it all and the other person hasn't? And what does that mean? Is there a power imbalance in terms of that? What happens when you start collecting the data? Is that reasonably forthcoming, or is there delay and avoidance? I'm glad to see that Holly is here today. We have a case right now and have had several cases where there's a huge imbalance between the pair in information, knowledge, confidence. And so the financials role is really, really critical to help coach that person in the sort of one down position, if you like, so that they feel confident when they come to the joint meeting that they can actually discuss what it is that their needs are. The financial person will assist them develop budgets. It's not all going to be finalized right at the very beginning, but certainly start talking about that and assist them figure out how they're going to do that. And so we get to a place where the financial information is collected. And I have pretty much worked with the couple in terms of enough to know what's going on with the parenting plan. And we then have a team briefing meeting. So before this team briefing meeting, the couple meet their respective lawyer. And that's the first time within the within the foundation step that they meet their lawyers. And this is another thing that has, of course, been controversial worldwide because of the way that we've taken control of this. I've taken control of this. At MELCA and at Peacemakers, we actually match clients to lawyers. So yeah, they can go on the website and they can see all the people who are trained in collaboration. But my argument is that they have no idea from one lawyer to another who's going to actually be a good fit for them, whereas we know who will be a fit for them. We also know, probably more importantly, who are the pair of lawyers who work well together and who have worked well together historically. And if they haven't worked well historically, is one of them more senior than the other in terms of team collaboration and can then assist that second lawyer along in the casework. So I make a recommendation to the clients as to who the two lawyers are. They do a meet and greet. They do a minimal kind of exchange of information because I don't want the lawyers spending a lot of time and hence the client spending a lot of money duplicating all the information that we all have. But they have to be retained to get permission from the client to discuss the case before we have our briefing meeting. So we have a briefing meeting without the clients. And I share all the family information that I've collected, of course, with the client's permission, and the financial share the high spots, the summary of the financial picture. We're particularly giving a heads up and a red flag to the lawyers about where we think the stumbling blocks are going to be, what we think the difficulties might be. I give all sorts of recommendations about how I think it would be a good idea for them to manage their client, for example. So I'm giving them tips on communication, on nurturing, on pacing, on engagement, all sorts of things. And so we share that information. Then the financial submits the financial information online, obviously, or on a memory stick, etc., to the lawyer. So they then have the financial disclosure. The lawyers don't collect the financial disclosure. The financial neutral does. Okay. So I'll pause there because that's also another whole mouthful. Any comments, any reactions to that?
Is everyone okay if I say stuff all the time? Because I know I'm very verbose. So
that's all right, Carl. At least I know there's one person out there. I can't tell. That's one of the problems with doing this kind of stuff online. When I do trainings, I do very interactive, engaged training. As I was saying to Linda, really for me, the efficacy of this work, the training has to be in person, not online. So at least, Carl, at least I know you're listening and you haven't turned your sound off and gone and made yourself coffee. Well done.
no, so my only question on that one was, like you said at the end there, that the financial professional then just gives the information to the lawyers. I have found that I don't give it to them ahead of time. I actually book a meeting with them, present it to them so they understand how I'm going to present to their clients, so that this, again, there's always a story behind the numbers. And no offense to the lawyers, but a lot of times they may just look at the numbers and go, oh, okay, I have no idea what he's talking about, but that sounds good. Whereas I find that, especially with the files that I've done and the lawyers that have now worked with me enough times, have recognized that story that I present, they get to see again, which then allows them to have those conversations with their clients if there are questions. Absolutely,
Carl, completely agree with that. I think that there's, pardon me, very different in style in terms of what happens in this phase. I've had a couple of financial neutrals. My great financial neutral right now is in Edmonton, and we don't have quite the easy capacity to sit down together face to face and do what I have done with her predecessor. And it's not a problem. It's just, we just adjust because one of the things that we've done is, certainly before COVID, was to get the clients in, because by that time I have worked with them enough jointly that they're prepared to come and work in the same room, and we get them around the table and we put all the data up on the spreadsheet, on the wall, on the computer, and we have a conversation, which is essentially a four-way mediation, again, not with lawyers, and we're not mediating any decisions or any outcome, but we're using mediation skills to help them agree that the data is the data that they wish to present, right? Because that's the first thing, is that they have to actually agree on the data. They've got to agree on the paper trail, that they have to agree on what's missing. They've got to agree on what the numbers are. And so if all of that work, or at least as much as possible, is done before we get to the negotiation meeting, we don't have to have a lot of that work being done then. Now, that description of the data is done then, because the lawyers need to do due diligence to do that. But if we've done a lot of that already, then the emotional tone and the potential for conflict has been addressed. Okay, so completely agree with you in terms of the story behind the numbers, but that can take a lot of time, and it can take a lot of time in the collaborative joint meetings. And I guess my argument is that what we have found is that if we can do a lot of this legwork before we get there, we actually have these cases settle in one, maximum of 2 collaborative meetings with 6 people in the room. And that's valid data. And I think that's the proof of the pudding in terms of the amount of work that we do up front. It's less expensive for them because my fees and the financial fees aren't as expensive as the legal fees. And so it keeps the overall cost of the case down. Okay. All right. So we're having our, oh yes, hello, Tanya.
Hi. Yes, I would say my experience is the same in terms of the process that we use. And I find often the challenge is keeping it on track. As you mentioned, when they come to us or the coach first, right, then we have more ability to kind of move the process forward, you know, in the joint meetings. Depending on the lawyers who come on board, I myself as well like to suggest the lawyers based on, you know, what the situation is shaping up to be and the good fits with each other. And I also find that, you know, when a new lawyer is brought on board as well, it's often that challenge of keeping it in the process, as opposed to, you know, Carl, as you mentioned, when you know, walk through the information, then sometimes lawyers will say, okay, great, we've got it from here, we'll just take the information. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not part of the process. This is what the client signed on to. We're supposed to walk through it together. And if you're looking to change the process, then we need to have everybody on board to say, okay, you know, this is what we're doing. So it's not just a kind of let's slide over there now. And so I find oftentimes that's the challenge, is they keep wanting to move back to what they're used to doing, which is the lawyer-led negotiations or back and forth proposals or letter writing. And then you have to continually just kind of be like, okay, no, this is what we're doing. So I just wanted to, I guess, re-emphasize what you had stated there with respect to, who's on the team and how they participate.
So Tanya, you're a financial?
Yes.
Right. And so do you work really closely with the family professional to do the kinds of things you're talking about now?
Oftentimes I'm usually the case manager, and I'm usually the incoming client connection. And so usually I get that started and then make the connection with, we use divorce coach, but I do like the fact that you don't use that, because I do think that a better terminology would be, I guess, less apprehensive for the clients. And then, so we do work together. If somebody doesn't want a mental health professional on board, then it's usually me then that's working with the lawyers as part of the process.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yes, because often the actual way this model gets tweaked worldwide is to do with exactly where the professionals are in the world and what their own particular strengths and skill set, what their skill set is and what their personality is. And so the leadership comes, and often then that gets reflected in what the model looks like, in terms of who's leading, if you like, or who's facilitating from the front end. I would be really wanting to encourage you to encourage the clients not to reject the idea of a mental health professional, because I think to have that added discipline, they will give you great support as the second neutral in trying to do what you're doing with the rest of the team. You don't have to carry it all yourself. Then you can offset that with the person on the other end of the table. And B, it really does provide an opportunity for the clients to have a more in-depth look at things like their relationship in the future, their communication strengths and weaknesses, and if they're parents, what the parenting is. And so that would just be an aside that I would say to you based upon what I just heard you saying.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. We do try.
Right. Well, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just as a sidebar, so much of this stuff comes with prejudices and assumptions about how much it's all going to cost, these two things. And I don't use the term mental health professional. I use parenting, I use family. I ask at the very beginning, so what sorts of things are troubling you in that very first conversation? And the financial person, if they're doing the intake, they would be asking the same sorts of things. What sorts of things are troubling you? Where do you want to be in a year's time or 5 years' time? And gosh, do you think that you'll be able to manage to do that with the children's other parent on your own or without any kind of third party input? And that, so it's presented in the way that what their goals are and how they're going to fulfill their goals and what's the resource team that they need to help them get there. And that's kind of how it's presented, rather than either of them having any kind of sense that there may be something mentally, wrong with them in terms of a mental health perspective. Okay, so that's just just my hints about the use of terminology. Okay, so we're in this briefing meeting with the four professionals, and then the clients then have an additional meeting or two, depending upon what's required, with their lawyers on their own, because the lawyers then have the financial data. So everything is getting fine-tuned and starting to prepare specifically for the negotiation and settlement meeting, which is step 3. Now, if we've done all of our homework, and if the clients have done their homework, and if we're ready for that meeting, the meeting will be 2 to 3 hours, maybe a little longer. Maybe there'll be some caucusing through that meeting, and there'll be one meeting. There might be homework or agreements in principle, which then need some time to kind of filter down, or some more information that might be needed. And then there's a second meeting, and the second meeting might be in, let's say, 2 weeks to a month. And the second meeting would be a finalizing meeting. And then after that, the case then goes into the documentation phase. So that's kind of the way that that it runs, and it usually takes, I don't know, 2 to 3 months max, and it's usually successful. There have been some hiccups along the way, but mostly it's successful. Okay, so any other comments about that? Any other questions? Okay, so second slide, please, Linda. All right, so I've got some slides which actually come from Linda, which are your questions, which we'll get onto in a minute. But before I get to those, I just thought we'd just have a bit of a touch on these themes, which I think are really important, given that the overall topic of today was diffusing minefields. 3 disciplines: law, psychology, counseling, social work, and finance. They're 3 quite different people. They're 3 quite difficult bedfellows. They have got different personalities, different styles. There are reasons why those individuals chose that profession and didn't choose another profession. And so we have a big task to think about how we create a team that's a really good team with those people. And so not everybody is going to be able to be a team player, and you're not going to be able to do this work with all the disciplines, even though it attracts lots of people for training. And there are lots of people, I mean, thousands of people worldwide who are trained in this across those 3 disciplines, but not everybody is working effectively in the team. And so there are some reasons for this that I can identify, but there are also lots of other reasons, which I'll leave you to your own thoughts and reflections. The first theme, I think, is to do with respect. Do we think that each of the disciplines are equal? Do we have suspicion or history in the background of other casework that's going to make us hesitant to trust the other disciplines? Can we let them do what they need to do to do their job? I just heard a chime. I don't know what that means.
It's just,
Linda?
we just had another person join us, that's all.
Oh, okay, that's fine, right, that's not a question. I can't see anybody in my list of people in terms of reactions. All I see is me, which is not necessarily helpful. So yeah, I think if you're going to do this work, you have to ask yourself, what do I think about financials? Do I have a stereotype about financials that they're just numbers people and they are essentially accountants and all they want to do is just present the money? Or do I think, well, hold on, those people are used to working with folks who have got huge anxiety about their financial status in the world, perhaps retirement, perhaps they've dealt with wills and estates, because money is incredibly loaded. And so those professionals are often going to have incredible skill set in being able to deal with people. They've also dealt with individuals on their own, but they've also dealt with couples, presumably, because I think that's something that I find more and more in this work, that not all the disciplines do. A lot of the lawyers, for example, are only used to working with one client. They're not used to working with couples and therefore haven't been faced with couple dynamics. Financials are. Financials can therefore think about what it's like to have 2 people in the room and have differences of opinions and one person have more knowledge than the other and so on. So that's just very basic. But I think that we have to really think about what the skill set and the attitudes are underneath the surface when we think about the other disciplines. And then we have to think about our attitudes towards lawyers, towards family lawyers. I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist. I have been in this business for many, many years. And before I became a mediator, I would have clients who, of course, would be extremely upset about their own lawyer or the lawyer of their partner, particularly if they were going through a separation and divorce. And all sorts of very negative accusation would be made about the profession. And of course, we know and have been exposed to all sorts of jokes about family lawyers and what family lawyers are like and what their priorities are. Well, I would say that the lawyers who are attracted to work in mediation and collaboration really do want what's best for the family. That's what I hope for anyway. And sometimes their behavior doesn't always match that goal or that aspiration. And so then we have to think, which is one of the questions that you have in the list here, we have to think of what's going on with that. And so when I do trainings, I talk about the 3 different disciplines and what and how and when we feel competent, what makes us feel competent. I'm in a profession where I have a huge tolerance, a very high tolerance for ambiguity. Lawyers don't have necessarily a high tolerance for ambiguity. Obviously, there's some exceptions, but I don't necessarily assume that I'm going to know the answer to a problem before I start. I'm prepared to trust the process. I'm prepared to listen and to think about how things are going to be added and changed as things evolve. That's not a usual characteristic that comes with being a lawyer. And so to do this work, it's actually a different kind of approach, and you have to kind of put a different hat on. So the first thing is our attitude towards each other. Second one, role clarity. Do we actually know what we're doing? And do we actually know what we're meant to be doing and what everyone else is meant to be doing? And can we describe that to a client? So could we all, no matter what discipline we are, could we all do a brief information session where we talk about what the roles are and how we work? And then, of course, is it clear when there can be the potential for a blurring of that boundary and to move over into someone else's lane? And how does that get managed? Also, another question that has come in your question list, who's going to manage that? In my world, I do a lot of that managing because for the most part, I'm managing the case. But that doesn't have to be me. It can be the other neutral. We have to make sure that we have a team who is already a team before we start the case. We don't just start with people who we don't know, who are brand new. And so we have to figure out what the jobs are and how are we going to work together. And if somebody is going to blur or go over a line, how are we going to manage that? Who is going to call that out? Confidentiality is another big theme that we have to be really thoughtful about, how that's being managed, and that we're very clear with our clients about the disclosure, limits to disclosure, and when there might be some exceptions, and who we're going to be disclosing this information to. And then we get down to more specifics in terms of things like the liability for missing information and how heavily do you push for the data. I would see that this would be more in the financial world. The next one, alignment or triangulation. We think about clients trying to split the team. We think about clients who have maybe diagnosable or not even diagnosable personality disorders like borderline personality. They can be characteristics of borderline, which aren't necessarily with them all the time, but under stress of separation, divorce, they can become very positional. They can become very much somebody who wants to have an individual only in their corner. So we work hard. I work hard to be neutral. The financial works hard to be neutral. The lawyer is their advocate, but the lawyer has to be really careful that they don't get aligned with this client's story and that they stay open to the fact that it is this client's story and isn't necessarily going to be reflected by the other client's story. And so that there is a different form of advocacy if they're a collaborative lawyer, because they also have to think about the family system as a whole. Advising, I don't advise. I might recommend, or I might have an opinion, or not even recommend might even be too strong. The financials, you can speak to this afterwards when I finish this, if you like. Do you think that you actually provide advice that's within the terms of your professional organization, your professional ethics? Mostly we remain neutral and we may have an opinion, but we're not using the word advice in the sense that maybe a lawyer is giving advice. Lawyers still give advice, and lawyers give advice as collaborative lawyers, but we don't advise. I can give suggestions. I can give ideas about what's happened with previous parenting plans, for example, but I don't advise. And the topic about standard protocols is something that was raised recently with the financial I know, because I think even Carl raised it. You know, what do you do? What's the format that all this financial data is in? And does it follow what the lawyers are used to? They like to have it all lined up and all set up in a particular way. We'll find out what they like and present it that way, or encourage them to think about how you want to present it your way and why, right? And so there's not going to be loss of time or more money spent in figuring out how the data is going to be presented. That's really important, because I think that can be a real slowdown in just how the lawyers would like to have the data presented. Okay, so that's some high points from me. Any comments about that?
I'll maybe just pop in and have a comment regarding the advice thing. It's one of the areas that we work very hard with our training to encourage the financial people who have come from a place where it was normal to provide recommendations and that. And so we change that vocabulary, that they're not doing that. And in order to stay neutral, it's, you know, they're presenting options to consider, or they're showing the concerns that may have popped up or something, but not doing anything in a directive, because that's what we consider crossing the line.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And so here we are back to language, right?
Yeah.
Back to terminology. And there may be some professionals out there who default back to giving what would historically have been advice. And of course, we've got clients in front of us who really haven't got any idea at all about what it is that we do. They come with a presumption. If I say I'm a psychologist, or I'm a this, I'm a that, or you say you're a financial, or the lawyer says that they're a lawyer, then of course that comes with a particular set of assumptions in the mind of the client. And so we have to do some work in the beginning to say, you know, I say that I'm this and I have this role. You might find that I'm doing A, B, and C when we're in this process, which will surprise you, or you might be not used to that. So for example, the financial situation is a really good example. They may think, oh, well, you're a financial, you should be advising me on what I should be doing. And then you can say, well, actually in collaborative practice, this is a team, and you will find that my role is somewhat different than being a conventional financial planner. I'm not doing financial planning here. I have a quite different role. And these are the things that I'm going to be focusing on and assisting you with and giving you support in, but I won't actually be giving you specific advice in that narrow sense that you might be expecting. So we educate from the very beginning, and we let people ask what their expectations are, ask what their assumptions are, and then correct them if that's not going to be consistent with what it is that we do.
Yeah, I think that's great ideas for everyone.
Okay, anybody else out there who would like to make a comment? It's 1:45. We've just got the questions that you had left. I'd quite like this to be a little bit more interactive than it is, although I appreciate the two folks and Linda who've made some comments.
So the one that I have that I think is extremely important, and again, not to diminish any of the other ones on this list, the notion of debriefing and talking about what happened during the meeting, I know has been of extreme value in the files that I've been part of, and especially from the family and of course the lawyers as well, is that they're just amazed at, if you have the ability to have candid conversations, how much you can grow as a team, right? And not to take everything personally, but to actually recognize that we're all here to become better at what we're doing, and to listen to each other and say, hey, when you said this was the reaction of the room. When you said this, it probably wasn't the best reaction. Maybe we want to change that verbiage. But when you're doing it and when you're in that moment, you a lot of times don't have an idea that that's what's happening. So I know for myself, and again, Linda knows me quite well, I'm a very in-your-face kind of character. But at the same time, if someone tells me, Carl, it didn't work, okay, that's good. I listen to it and I change. You know, it's that notion of putting ego aside and recognizing that the only way you're going to learn is by making mistakes.
Oh,
so,
absolutely. Which is why I put it on the list: debrief, debrief, and debrief. It's one of the things that at the end of a very long joint meeting often gets neglected, sadly, because people are rushing off to do something else, or they say, oh, I'll debrief on my phone in the car or whatever. And so I would say that I would also have to put my hand up and acknowledge that we probably don't debrief the joint meetings as much as we could do as we go. We certainly try and do a proper debrief at the end, or at the end of what seems to be a really constructive meeting. If something went awry and went sideways, absolutely we would debrief. There's no problem. There's absolutely no problem about that. And not only is there debriefing, but there's pre-briefing. And so the team briefing meeting before we even start the joint meetings is one place we do that. We also come together, and I'm assuming that you people would also do this. Absolutely. Let's say we start the meeting, the joint meeting at 10. We will meet at 9:30. The professional team meet at 9:30 at the absolute latest, and have that first half an hour without the clients to brief what we're going to do, generate the agenda, update each other on what might be have been happening to those clients very recently, just prior to the meeting, and so on. Figuring out signals, figuring out what it is that we're going to do. Are we going to need breakout rooms? Are we going to, all the things that we need to do to make this meeting successful? Because we're not committed to 3 or 4 or 5 meetings. We're committed to 1 or 2 only. And so we really want this we want everyone to be ready for it. So yes, absolutely debrief.
So
and
actually,
your comment about learning, growth, absolutely critical. And that's, again, I'm back to, is it Tanya? Is Tanya the financial who made the comment before, Linda?
Yes.
Okay, so Tanya, another real reason to have a mental health professional in the room at the meeting, because the debriefing are really important about the group process. And although financials may have a great deal of knowledge and you may have training in group process and so on, you don't necessarily have the depth of knowledge that therapists may have who have done couple and group sessions for decades. And we really study group dynamics. And so the professional group and the group that also includes the clients, what's going on in that meeting systemically is something that the mental health professional in the room is the expert in. And that's where the growth comes from, particularly with things like alignment, particularly with things like the difficulty under pressure with anxiety that everybody has. But if there's a relationship going on between a lawyer and their client and they feel that they have to deliver, what goes on with that and how that can create a real barrier to successful negotiation if we're not able to talk that through. So do you all understand what I'm talking about? Do you have enough of a working knowledge of what actually happens in what I call in the room? Obviously, it can be a virtual room or a literal room in a joint meeting with 6 people. What sorts of things can happen that you would need to be debriefing? Linda, can you say yes or nod?
Yeah.
I
think so.
Yeah. And thumbs upping. I don't see any thumbs upping.
Yeah, I see thumbs up.
Excellent. I can't see anything on my side, so you'll have to kind of keep. This is like doing something blind. This is really quite interesting. But usually I am, as I say, I would either host it and I can see all the faces and whatnot. Just can't see any of the faces. Yeah. Okay, so any other questions on my list of themes? Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list of themes, but they were just some of the high spots.
Sorry.
That's okay, no problem. That was just some of the high spots that that I think of in terms of minefields. Maybe what I'll do before we get into the questions, maybe I'll just sort of give a couple of examples, case examples of things that have been trickier through the years. Cases where, and I do this in my training, where any of the professionals can get really triggered by their own or the other client. And why do we get triggered? Well, we get triggered because of our own history. We get triggered because of how they look physically, or how they carry their body, or how they communicate, or how they're treating their spouse in that meeting, right? We get triggered in all sorts of ways. And so before we know it, subconsciously, we're actually making some kind of judgment that we're either on their side or not on their side. And that can include our own client as well. And so we can go, if we're neutral, we can go out of neutrality, pretty easily if that sorts of things is happening. And if we're a collaborative lawyer, we need to be able to talk about how we feel about our client and how we feel about the other lawyer's client or the other client in the room, and whether in fact we're aware of those individual triggers, because they can get in the way of the work that we're doing. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can get rid of it completely, but if we are aware, awareness is knowledge, really, right? Knowledge is power. So yes, we've had clients where there has definitely been alignments between the client and their lawyer. There has definitely been significant antagonism between lawyer for her, stereotypically, against lawyer for him, which the lawyers aren't comfortable or used to talking about. So we have a profession in the law and in finance as well, but not in my profession, that is not used to supervision, is not used to feedback, is not used to being observed, and particularly is not used to necessarily publicly, not so much getting it wrong, but having another way of being able to do something. When you go through my kind of profession, you have yourself on audio and on video and being given supervision and being given feedback, you know, for years while you're developing your credentials. And so that transparency as a professional is not something that is not something we're not used to. It doesn't necessarily mean we like it, but we're certainly used to it. But for me to be able to encourage all the other members, professional members of the team, to be transparent about their own practice and to be able to speak with tact and kindness to the other professionals in the room is something that is really important to do. And so that's sort of a follow-up on what Carl has said. Carl, I get the impression that when you say that you're an in-your-face person, if I was the family professional working in the case and I thought you were in my face, you're saying that you wouldn't mind if I said, Carl, hold on, can we just take a few minutes just to sort of pause and think about how you're coming across?
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of funny. I have a really good relationship with our family professional here in London. She was actually my mentor for mediation, so she knows my idiosyncrasies, and yeah, she has no problems telling me to put me back in my place if need be, or if I say things that she doesn't understand, she knows full well that the audience doesn't understand either. And again, I think a lot of times, because for one, we look at the financial information on a regular basis, we understand financials, and then when we try to convey it is in the most simplistic ways we possibly can, even then sometimes it's not simplistic enough for everyone to follow. So she does a great job of making sure that I'm kept in check, so there are no deer in the headlights, and that everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, well, one of the things that I do deliberately is I don't engage in a lot of the content of the financial information until it starts being presented. And then I can actually say quite generally, well, I'm confused. I don't really understand what that's about. Can you please explain that for me? And so I can then, relate to what might happen in terms of both people needing to have the understanding. Okay, good. All right, any other comments on? No? Okay. So questions. Linda, would you mind giving a background as to where these questions came from and how you developed them?
Sure. There's some of these questions are things that have come out from conversations with various members or groups of members, and some of them are things that I've seen, online, etc. So a lot of it's come from our group and or interactions with people that are working in collaboration.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so first one is how to best manage collaborative team members who are not working together collaboratively, reverting to adversarial positions. Okay, so this is, we've started to touch on this already, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's one discipline more than another. Is there anything about this? Is there any more elaboration, Linda, that you'd like to give for this question?
Well, I guess the one thing I could say is that frequently collaborative teams or some of our members have come back to our group and sort of said about that everybody, things were going along well, and then one or the other members of the team did sort of align too much with a client and behaved in more of an adversarial way, may have even wanted to go as far as derailing the process unless certain demands were met. And so that's kind of where this has come from.
Okay, so what we want, you're talking about manage. If you are already in it, obviously it's difficult because you're identifying something that is already starting to happen. The first response I would have would be to try and prevent this as much as possible. And the prevention is to do with how you set the team up in the beginning. Do you know each other? Are you able to have frank and transparent conversations like what Carl and I just kind of exemplified? Are you able to actually say to each other, hold on, can I just give you some constructive feedback? Or do you mind if I give you an opinion about X, Y, and Z, right? Don't take it personally. This is just an observation. So do you know everybody of those 4 people? Do those 4 people know each other well enough to be able to do that before you even start? If not, you need to develop that kind of comfort with each other. And then you raise this as a theme. Okay, everyone, have you had any experience where you have felt that you needed to identify with your client to such an extent that you're really promoting their position? And so, I would actually bring it up as a hypothetical to see if anyone even is prepared to speak to discomfort if that starts to happen. So that's a prevention approach. If you're in it already, then it's obviously a question of who notices it first, who's labeling it, and what do you do about it, and whose job is it to label it? And again, we're back to who's chairing, who's facilitating, who has the confidence and the competency within that group to deal with these sorts of dynamics, and who has respect from everybody else in the team to be heard by that person, right? And so to be able to say, okay, in that meeting, did anyone else notice X, Y, and Z? Or, without having examples, it's difficult to actually address exactly what's happening, but I certainly know that that can happen. And do you stop it when it starts, before it even starts ramping up? And I think you need to have permission from everyone in the professional team to do that, because under pressure, it's not always easy to be able to be objective about your own process. You might be doing something and before you know it, you're down a track that you don't wish to be. And so the person who's chairing that meeting needs to be able to say, okay, let's take a break now, and we need to be able to have a break anyway. And during that break, you do some some processing out, some debriefing work so that it doesn't get any worse than it was. Linda, would you like to comment on that, and have anybody else comment in your group about that kind of question?
Sure. I'm going to ask the group first. Does anybody have a particular scenario that you lived through that you wanted to share, or that you either were really successful at improving the situation, or it derailed the process?
I know I do, but then that's not a surprise for most people. So we just had one file where, again, for context purposes, our group here in London is a fledgling. We're still falling all over each other, trying to figure out how this process works. So there was one file, and it started off 2 lawyers. Then they recognized, oh, we should do this collaboratively. So they brought in a family professional. Then 4 months later, they decided to reach out to me, and they said, okay, no, we really need a financial, because it's just not working properly. And so finally we got the full team together, and we've been trying to deal with it. Our 2 biggest hurdles, and never mind from a process standpoint, that's a whole separate thing. But from a file perspective, one, it was evident, and again, this is coming from our family professional, that the one participant had borderline personality disorder. So it doesn't matter really what we were saying, not necessarily was it taken in reality. At the same time, their lawyer also did a fantastic job at being a very litigation lawyer while trying to be collaborative at the same time by deflecting any of the issues. So by making excuses for the client, by able to deflecting if there's any major issues and so forth. And it came down to that debriefing again, where at the end, we ran through some of the conversations and allow the lawyer to kind of recognize that, oh, I was protecting my clients because I'm just so accustomed to doing that because I'm also a litigation lawyer, versus trying to remember that this is not my role, is not to sit there and to deflect and protect, but to, encourage the conversations to be able to help me move the process forward. So again, that debriefing helped tremendously, and that lawyer is a huge advocate of how well the collaborative file process does work now, and she's one of our biggest rah-rahs out there. So that's awesome. The funny part about that file as well, our family professional actually had to call a timeout during one of our meetings because she recognized that the one participant who had that borderline personality disorder had completely thrown the whole meeting off the rails, and all of us were completely confused as to what was going on. So she actually called a timeout for us to debrief us, to get us back on page to understand how to deal with this personality disorder. And I think, I know for myself, I was terrified of the woman per period, but whatever. But it just having that professional there restructured us and allowed us to finish the meeting in a very productive manner, to the point where we actually were successful in that meeting. Since then, the case has kind of fallen apart because, well, it just did. But no, and again, there's that ideal of, like, when you see a team member, and I know Melinda didn't really want to come out and say that it was a lawyer, but again, from an adversarial position, I don't see a neutral being very adversarial. Again, it's that debriefing and just having the ability to have those communications, those questions at the end, and allowing people to recognize their own way of, again, sometimes it's just they're so accustomed to doing it a certain way that they don't recognize it. And having the conversation to open up their mind and recognize that, oh, I did do that, now I need to change.
Thank you very much, Carl. I think that's really good information, and hopefully everybody's able to take all that on board. Narcissists and borderline personality disorder folks are, in my experience, the most difficult people to have in collaboration. There are times when I actually think, oh, I'm not sure that I can be bothered actually really working on this case, given how difficult some of those clients can be. So if you have someone really skilled at the front end who can discern some of those patterns at intake, and then forewarn the rest of the team as to how this person can best be managed, and you do some really good reading on high conflict personalities and how to manage them, then you probably can still be in business. But often, it's interesting that you say, Carl, that you had a really good meeting, and then since then it's fallen apart. Sometimes we then have to move into what is kind of collaborative caucusing in order to get to the end, because we aren't always able to have those folks in the meeting with everybody present. We have to actually divide it up in a constructive way, and the neutrals go backwards and forwards between rooms in order to be able to try and get it all solved, rather than the alternative, which is for it to ultimately go to litigation, which I try and do absolutely everything I can rather than refer it there, because we're just referring it, particularly with people with borderline folks and so on, we refer them to a system that is just going to be a disaster for them. Okay, so second question. Okay, so this is about the whole sharing of confidential information. Well, I mean, obviously the quick answer is it's a collaborative file. You sign a participation agreement and everything is open and above board and everything needs to be shared. However, I would say that there are some buts in relation to that. I have a therapeutic background. I get into some pretty deep and meaningful conversations with some of my clients, not always, because my job is not to be a therapist, but sometimes that just happens anyway. And so there could be a history of childhood abuse. There could be a history of all sorts of things which may not necessarily be absolutely relevant to the negotiation, meeting and settlement, but something that can come out of that in terms of their demeanor, their anxiety, their interaction with their ex-partner, their interaction with their ex-partner's lawyer, for example, that is relevant in the dynamics of the meeting that's worthwhile sharing. But the absolute substantive facts of their very ancient history don't have to be shared. But my job would be to try and say, okay, how does that then how does that get implemented and how does that flow into what is actually going on, A, in the marriage, and B, what might actually happen in the joint meeting. So that private information is something that I would have my clinical judgment on, or I put my clinical judgment to test to see how relevant it is. Other kinds of conversations could be what? Linda, would you share with me?
Well, I would say that I think based on, and part of the reason this question was here, there's times where clients share something that may be a key piece of information to assist the understanding of the team, and they say, well, that's not to be shared. Or in some cases, they've said that they will give this information to one of the team members, but they don't want any other team member to know it. And yet it could be something that would be, you know, a very relevant fact that would assist the team to move forward.
Okay, so that's back to splitting and the potential for the teamship or the team bonding to be undermined by what clients do. And we can think about examples of that, absolutely. And so that's a no-no, and that is better again if there's a prevention where the mechanics and the protocols of team collaboration is outlined at the beginning, but the clients aren't necessarily going to take it all in the beginning and remember it all, even though they've got written information to refer to as well. And so then if that piece of information is going to be disclosed, there are various ways that you can deal with that. You can say, hold on, are you about to tell me something that you don't want me to share or you don't feel you wish to have shared with the team? Let's not talk about the information. Let's talk about what you're just trying to do and the principle. And so you use that as an opportunity to re-educate the client as to what it is that they've signed up for. If something has been said and they then say afterwards, oh, I don't want that shared, again, you've got to do a bit of backtracking. And then there is the risk that you're going to have an issue between you and your client. Hopefully it's not going to result in them firing you, and that'll be dealt with tact, but a reminder to say, you know, remember when we talked about what team collaboration is and what the protocols are, this was one of the things that I described for you, and this is why it's really important. And you let them understand, because they probably know it already, but you reaffirm to them, you know, if you have me carrying secrets, what do you think that's going to be like for the other people in the group, particularly your ex's lawyer and so on? There's going to be an undermining of trust. One of the things that's really, really critical and core to this process is transparency and trust. So you use that as an example to let them be educated about why it is that you can't keep secrets.
Great, I think that's really good, good tips for us.
Okay. Anything else about that that's relevant?
Oops. Anybody else have anything or experiences that they had challenges with in this area? Again, it's back to, do the clients know what it is that you're doing
that you've got a different hat on. I mean, many of these clients have an individual therapist, and so they're used to confidentiality with an individual therapist. So I have to say right from the get-go, okay, I'm neutral. Do you have any idea what that means? Oh yeah, that's great. You know, you don't take sides. So yes, it means I don't take sides, but also it means that I'm not working as I would do with you as an individual therapist, where I'm keeping confidences and I'm keeping privacy. So it's a very different job that I'm doing in this, and this is why it has the value, la 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 la. And I'm not your therapist, basically. And so at times that is a real disappointment to them, or they really wish that they had that, or they push for that, right? And so that's when you kind of have all your antennae up, knowing that that's going to happen or is happening. And so you back off a step and you say, you know, when you ask me these sorts of questions, or you behave in this kind of way, I get the impression that you would like me to do A, B, and C. Is that correct? Okay, well, actually, remember, that's not the job I'm doing here. And that's why you've got Dr. So-and-so in your corner, because they're your individual therapist and you can be working with them on that, and that's completely private. So you try and deal with it very gently and tactfully, but you don't move from what the absolute principles are of team collaboration.
Okay, that's great. So I think based on what you're saying, to some degree, it's like the team needs to be clear on what's going to be shared and what isn't going to be shared, as well as bringing the clients back to always what the process is like.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Next one.
Yep.
What to do if not all the collaborative. Okay, so do you do that in Ontario? Do you do what is variously called small c collaboration, collaborative light, collaborative-esque settlement meetings? Like, do you do any kind of sit down together with a collaborative attitude but without the PA?
I know that I mean, in my group up here in Sudbury, that doesn't happen, but I have listened to many members talk about the fact that either when they've been brought in late, and maybe then somebody just forgot, or there is definitely some small c collaborative light stuff that does go on.
Okay, so it depends upon whether you think it's going to be problematic. I mean, I would say, you know, my first reaction to this question is, okay, so what animal are we dealing with here, to be absolutely frank? Is this a collaboration, small c or big C or whatever? Not with a contract, not with an agreement, but in principle, in spirit. Is this a process where, through open, trusting communication, all four professionals are trying to assist this couple come to a resolution for the best possible outcome for all the members of the family? Like, is that kind of what our goal is? And if it is, then it's a collaboration, and we're using our collaborative skills and our mediation skills. We're not taking sides. We're using the lawyers are using the family law information and family law advice constructively, assisting the clients understand what it is, but also letting them know that they don't have to accept it if they don't wish to, etc. Right? So is that the spirit of what we're doing? Because if we're doing that, we don't need agreement. But that's me as a psychologist speaking, right? I mean, the lawyers have particular requirements with the law societies about what they can do and not do. Presumably, the big issue is that if you don't settle, and if there hasn't been an agreement, and if you don't settle, and then people want to leave the process. So does that mean if there isn't a signed agreement, then the lawyer can change hats and continue with the case? Well, technically, yes. But should they? I don't know. You could have me debate that for the next few hours. So has there been problems with that in your jurisdiction, Linda?
As I said, not I would say here with the collaborative team that I work with in Sudbury, but I've certainly heard other members of our organization, other financials who have run into problems. I mean, I've certainly encouraged them, if it's a true collaborative process, then, you know, you would also be wanting to sign on.
Sure. Just sign the agreement. Why not?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. But anyways, and I think at least in some of the situations that have been brought to my attention where they were frustrated with how things went, there were situations where maybe the lawyers weren't, and in this particular cases that came to me anyways, it was lawyers that were not, they were, they were trained collaboratively, but they were not true to the collaborative process, and that they were directing clients as to who they could speak to or who they couldn't speak to, and sometimes not being respectful of all of the team members.
Well, in that situation, at the very minimum, you need to have a signed PA, because at least then the neutrals and the person in my job can actually say, well, hold on, we're actually doing a collaboration and there's a participation agreement, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily going to stop them doing that sort of stuff anyway, right? If you know that that sort of stuff is happening, then you're back to the previous question, which is, all right, it has to be debriefed, it has to be named up, right? I suppose if people behave in that way, in that non-collaborative way, and they are, however tactfully, confronted in what they're doing, they could become defensive and say, well, there isn't a signed collaborative agreement. That's your problem. Then you need to have a signed collaborative agreement. It's tricky. I would then go back to step one, which is the very thing I started off with, attitude towards other disciplines. Know your lawyers, know your financial, and know your family professional. Know who you have on your team, because it's really tricky to do it when you don't know that person. So I have another example, which is not so much sign the participation agreement, although the subtext is about that, but it's not even in the subtext, is that you can't sign a participation agreement to do a formal collaboration if you're not trained as a collaborative lawyer, right? Right? Is that the same?
Yeah.
Right. So I've done cases where it is a collaboration in spirit, what I call in spirit, and in process, and in agreement from the clients. But one of the clients happens to have a lawyer already, and that lawyer is not a trained collaborative professional. And even though I might, and have done, encourage the client to change lawyers for various reasons, obviously the team and knowing that the two lawyers know each other and so on and so forth, the client has said very tactfully and respectfully, well, no, actually I have done quite a lot of work with this lawyer and I really want to continue with this lawyer. Can we do a collaboration with this lawyer? So I then have this mini protocol. I have a subtext, I have a subroutine protocol. So I then say, okay, who is the lawyer for the other person? And if they don't have a collaborative lawyer yet, which is likely because we've got this sort of power imbalance going on, I try and encourage them to have a very experienced collaborative lawyer. And then I ask that collaborative lawyer, are they prepared to work a case, not a formal collaboration, without a PA, with this other lawyer who by that point then is known by name? Yes or no? And so if we get a yes, sometimes it's a tentative yes, I then say, all right, I'm prepared to phone the other lawyer who has this reputation as this big litigator or whatever it is, right? And to talk to them about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. And are they prepared to work a case in a different way, basically as a collaborative professional, without an agreement. And if we get the sense that, yes, we've got a contract between us, then we proceed. And that's happened in, I think, 3 cases over my experience. All ultimately have been successful. There have been more meetings, and usually the case is a pretty complicated case anyway, financially, which is why the client wanted to keep this particular lawyer in anyway. I have had, in fact, I have said to those lawyers, will we draw up a different kind of contract, which is just amongst us, which is to do with our behavior and our intent and how we treat the clients. And the lawyers have generally said, no, we don't want to have anything in writing, but we do on email or whatever want to be able to acknowledge that this is not a settlement meeting within a litigation context. It's a different animal. And so we're not just having a settlement meeting with high-low negotiation. We're actually doing it differently. And so it kind of fell to me to try and manage that lawyer. And it fell to me coaching the other lawyer to coach their colleague in what we do in collaboration. So it's kind of complicated, but it was worth it because, again, like Carl's example, one of these particular lawyers was a very, very well-known litigator nobody could believe that that particular lawyer in Calgary would take on a collaborative or a collaborative-esque file. And they became one of the best proponents for the movement.
Well, that's a great endorsement.
Indeed, indeed. And sometimes those endorsements are, not that they should be more than anybody others in other people's endorsements, but they're very, very effective. So
for sure.
Ones, yeah.
Great.
Did I see somebody wanting to ask a question? I think we've got some questions in the chat box. Do you see the chat box, Linda?
Okay, let me go check and see. We see that Tanya said she's had that happen to her. And somebody's just thanking us. I think that's it right there.
Oh, okay. So there's no new questions.
No.
It's Susan here. I work with Linda in Sudbury as well. I'm also financial, and I found that like in our group, everybody has to sign the PA, and sometimes when clients behave badly, we actually reread the PA back to them.
Excellent.
And it's been very helpful. So I can't imagine actually not having that document in the room.
It's interesting, Susan, that you raised that, because when the question comes out, it sounds like it's to do with the collaborative professionals who have signed or not signed. If we look at it from the client's perspective, I actually think it's really important for the clients. And I have done a number of things with clients over the years where we've re-signed literally as a ritual the collaborative agreement, right? Or we've brought it out and read it in order for them to recommit. So numbers of the things happen as a case will unfold. But yeah, the whole commitment that the clients have to the PA is really important.
Yeah,
agreed.
Great. Thanks. I'm gonna keep us going.
Okay, so how to assist clients without crossing the line to move them forward when they get stuck on an issue. All right, so clients get positional. Clients need to be reminded and re-educated about the difference between what they're wanting to do in terms of positions and not being positional in terms of their negotiations, so that they don't get stuck, or reminding them about when they're getting stuck. Crossing a line, in what sense do you mean that, Linda? Do you mean that would be advice giving, crossing a line, or do you mean crossing a line from one discipline to another?
Well, both, basically, that you're so that you feel so passionate about where things are going that you're maybe do go beyond your role, and in some cases that that maybe somebody breaks out and is giving advice because they're thinking, it comes from a good place perhaps, but they're thinking, okay, if I don't go this far, this is going to fall apart.
Okay, so you might be the financial in this situation, thinking and feeling this about the clients.
Sure.
Okay, so you might not be able to catch yourself, but you hope that you've got the other neutral as your buddy at the other end of the table, who might help catch you and say, hold on, let's take a look at what's happening here. And you would then have the me person do a processing out kind of conversation around the table. Here we've got this agenda and we're discussing this agenda, and this looks like an option, but perhaps there might be some other options. And so then you try and take a step back and widen the mandate or widen the conversation so that it doesn't seem like it's so narrowly going down this positional track. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So,
I think that trying to remind them too about interests and positions in the moment is trickier than talking about it theoretically at the beginning, right? Because they think, oh yeah, we understand that. But when, and they need to obviously get reminded that when we're in the cut and thrust or get to the pointy end of the negotiations, you may forget about the difference. And you may start sounding as if you really are holding on to this idea and only this idea or this particular item, and you're not going to give it up. You will find then this is me saying this, you will find then that I might interject or your lawyer might interject. And that's where I coach the lawyer for that particular client. The person who is the most powerful in that conversation or in that interchange then is this particular client's lawyer. It's actually not the neutral. The neutral can do various things, right? But it's the lawyer who is the specific advocacy for that client to say, hold on, let's take a look at the other things that we talked about and blah, 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 blah. And it may even get to the point that they need to have a little bit of a breakout and just talk to their client on their own, right?
Right.
But that's where the client has that's where the collaborative lawyer has to not be positional,
Right.
right? And not be aligned. And they need to be, oh, really, you know, oh, so-and-so, you know, John Smith or Peggy Sue, would you think that it would be a good idea to have an individual chat with your client right now to try and help them understand what some other options might be and how la 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 la. And so the person in my role might actually cue that, and then the collaborative lawyer has to think, oh yes, I better go and do some coaching with my client.
Right. No, that's excellent. Excellent. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on.
Sure. Are we finishing at past?
Yeah, pretty much. So we
Okay.
only have a few minutes.
Right. So is this the last one?
I believe this is the last one. Yeah.
Okay. What ways are the professionals able to convey they truly have no biases to one party or the other? Clients just want what is unrealistic. Oh, good question. All right. Well, neutrality. I mean, we could talk about this topic at a very theoretical and esoteric and philosophical level in terms of what is neutrality. Because what is lack of bias? I actually believe that we have all sorts of biases. We have all sorts of subjective opinions about all sorts of things. But are we aware of what they are and when they actually come into play? I think that's the difference. And when we're neutral, can we actually be really cognizant of when that's actually at work? So if we're back to sort of an example again of the clients being unrealistic or being positional about a particular thing, it's a coaching issue, and we all coach. So would that client benefit from having a one-on-one with the financial professional, or with the me person, or with their lawyer, or whatever it is that's going on? You've got 4 people in that room, 4 professionals in that room, maybe not the other lawyer, although sometimes the other lawyer can be really powerful as well. But certainly you've got 3 people in the room for that client to be able to assist them get off what this unrealistic particular position is. And so I would hope that we could all work together. That's where the teaming comes in, to really assist that client. And we do it in different ways, right? I would do it from an emotional point of view. It could be something that they have symbolically attached to do with grieving, or to do with what's significant for them in the history of their relationship. So, you know, we may have some extra work to do around that in order to help them let go of that. It may have a particular financial tag. That may be because that individual is very afraid and they feel that they need more money than they actually really need. And so that's the financial's job, to be able to go back and reflect on the budget and what's realistic and what they'll really, and where the money's coming from, and that they will be okay, and to give that kind of reassurance. Or is it a legal issue, right? And the lawyers are able to give them the particular coaching and specific collaborative advocacy that they will really trust and know that they're in their corner. So again, I think that these are absolutely really good questions that force us as a team to use all of our skills together, which means that, as they say, you know, we're more than the sum of the parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a big endorsement on how helpful we can be to each other.
And the outcomes can be really creative and really outside the box from what other people would necessarily carve up in a settlement meeting. I mean, not even litigation in a full-blown court case, but just lawyers coming up with a settlement. You know, we've got clients, as I'm sure you have, who remain joint owners. We've got clients who one person takes it on because they can afford it, but they're not going to live in it if it's a matrimonial home, and the other person lives in the matrimonial home and pays them rent. I mean, we do all sorts of things through cooperation that is an outcome of this process.
For sure, for sure. So I'm going to skip us to the last slide just because you don't want to miss that.
No, so we want to end on a fun note, right? So poor Mrs. What is she? She must be a praying mantis. I think she's a praying mantis. He's got me over a barrel. If I don't eat my young, I'll starve. But if I do eat them, I'll lose my child support. Oh, Alice, divorce is so hard.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've all learned a lot, and I think you've given us lots of food for thought, and hopefully we can take some of this back to the teams that we work with and help them to, you know, do a better job overall.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Linda. As I said before, it really feels like I'm doing this to nobody out there in kind of this no man or no woman's land. So I'd appreciate some feedback. Doesn't matter if it's even just bullets or constructive or even non-constructive. Because as I said, when I do this kind of presentation, I normally at least can actually see the audience online, and this is not happening today. So it's good information for me to choose not to host, which is what the outcome is, right?
Right.
Because I'm not seeing all the little thumbnails. Oh, there, I've got some thumbnails now. Hello. So there's Susan and Tanya. Who else is there? Scroll up, Linda, so I can see who's still here.
Just a sec. Yeah,
There's
Holly's still here.
Jerusha.
Yeah, Jerusha.
What a beautiful name, Jerusha.
Yeah.
Hi.
And I'll go the
Thank
other
you.
way. I could see, because I can see. Oh, there we go. There's Joyce Owen. There's Bettina. Rosa's hiding. Debbie's hiding. And Allison Anderson's hiding. So some people are there just behind their screens.
Behind their camera. Well, not a problem at all. Now we've got 8 comments in the chat. Do you mind reading those?
Yeah, I will. Where are we at here? Very good presentation. Would be great if files could be handled that way. Yeah, that's a good point. Oh, this is a long one. More of a comment on today's session. I have been actively listening to today's session, coffee in hand. This is a new territory for me, and my role is not neutral, but rather to raise awareness of this important dimension. Where are we at here? This important dimension of the client relationship across CIBC. I took forward to learning more, or look forward to learning more.
Well, someone from CIBC. Well, welcome. I'm glad that you can take some nuggets back to apply it in your particular jurisdiction. That's excellent. That's great.
Yeah. And Bettina said one part of it was challenging. Thanks for your time and presentation. Very valuable information. They had to leave. Please send slides. Somebody had the same thing happen to them. Yeah, and then somebody had to leave. So yeah, but I mean, overall, I think I definitely think everybody's learned something, and I would think that it would be a fascinating experience to have a training with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, that's my subject. So obviously everybody knows that. I always want to have a trip to Ontario. Yeah, well, lovely. No, I'm happy to come, and depending upon what you want, I could then think about whether it's interdisciplinary or just me, or you know what the topic is. We can figure all that out in the fullness of time. But no, really nice to have had so many people be interested enough to come and hear me.
For sure, and some of these people on here are also Westerners.
Oh, well, I know Holly is. I don't know who else.
Yeah, Daryl was. Bettina's
I'm
out
in Calgary.
Yeah, there you go. There, Jerusha.
Hi. Great.
Yeah, and Bettina's in on the island in Victoria. So yeah, we've got people all over.
There's Holly. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Tina. How are you?
I'm
I
great.
just want to say that I work with Dr. Tina on some files in Calgary. I'm in St. Albert near Edmonton, and I'm the chair of the board of the Edmonton Association as well as the Alberta Association. And I think the biggest factor that I see a difference in from the Calgary mentor or role is the cohesiveness. And whereas we're trying to get through those growing pains in Edmonton, just like Carl mentioned, and making sure that it really is truly interdisciplinary. And I think it's really beneficial if everybody takes this training. And the reason why I've taken it twice, I'm fully collaboratively trained, and I think that it's really beneficial for me to revisit the training, and that's why I'm on today. So if anybody is interested in maybe bringing this training into their practice group, I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you, Holly. That's a great endorsement, seeing as, and I didn't even have to pay her to do that, although you wouldn't necessarily know that, but that's great. Well, yeah, I mean, Holly and I met in one of the trainings that we did in Edmonton with Marguerite and Trisha. And then we did it again, didn't we, Holly, with Wendy and who? Can't remember. Was that with Marguerite as well? But regardless of that, now this is interdisciplinary team training, but it's, as I said to Linda, it's really the most effective if we can do it in person. And I think we could probably do an advanced approach and really focus on some of these nitty-gritty difficulties in 2 days. We wouldn't have to do 3 days. We could do an advanced 2 day, even 1 day, but it would have to be in person, I think.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Do you have that training in Alberta just generally rolling on a regular basis, or?
No, but it could be created, and it depends upon what it is that you would be specifically looking for. The trainer, I have trained with a financial who lives in Calgary. The lawyer with whom I've trained, he lives in Melbourne, and she could be parachuted in online. We could do a sort of a hybrid thing, although she would, of course, love to have an overseas trip, but we wouldn't have to have her in person. But it depends on who's in the room, right? So if it's mainly financials in the room, fine. If it's lawyers in the room, I really feel it's absolutely respectful and required to have a lawyer as part of the interdisciplinary team in the room, because they need to hear it out of her mouth. And it's really important if they're going to be taking this on board. And some of it, as we've said today, and we were pretty tactful about the topics, it's tricky stuff, and it needs to be a lawyer who's really coaching them to do the changes required.
Well, thanks very much. I hope everyone has a really good rest of your day, and it's been fascinating. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me. You take care now. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.